Today we're visiting Mow Cop. It's a fascinating site and it's quite hard to interpret. We drove in over the Cheshire Plain, which after you pass the Wrekin is just gently undulating, pretty flat land for about 20 miles. And ahead of you, you see this stark tower of rock of a hill ahead of you. And you have to drive up a very steep hill. Reaching the top, there's a small island of greenery at the top with rugged rocks sticking out. It suddenly goes from the Cheshire Plain to almost like you're in Yorkshire. And the further up you get a hint of this castle on top. And you wonder quite what it is. It looks like a ruin, could be a real castle. Certainly would have been a good spot to put a castle. You can see for about 20 or 30 miles in every direction. And apart from the Wrekin, everything is lower than you. But Mow Cop isn't really what it seems. It's not a historic castle. It's a folly. A place that should have had a castle was given a castle. And it's certainly a local landscape. It's a folly of a ruined castle, but it's as complete as it ever was. The Mow Cop itself is a small village perched around this hill, and the hill is the end of the southern Pennines. As you come up, it's very striking. It's wind blown. It wasn't a very stormy day, but I didn't fly my drone, and not just because you're not allowed to, but also because it really was very windy up here. Mow Cop's about 25 miles south of Manchester and 6 miles north of Stoke-on-Trent. And William Clowes from Burslem and Hugh Bourne from Stoke-on-Trent, they're all part of the city of Stoke-on-Trent, were primitive Methodists. They believed that Methodism had lost its way. They wanted to return to the roots of Methodism, preaching outdoors. And where better outside of the town than to go to Mow Cop? So in 1807, they organised a 14-hour camp meeting there with no doubt sermons and lectures. And there is an amphitheatre. It almost looks like an old quarry where you can stand and you could fit quite a few people. And they got hundreds of people. In fact, 31st of May 1807, that camp was what led to the founding of the Primitive Methodist Church 3 years later in 1810. And Mow Cop's ever since been tied to Primitive Methodism. There were large camps there in the years following the first one, and then there have been very large ones on the 100th, 150th, and 200th anniversary. And when you stand here, you see why this place would appeal. We're looking east here towards Derbyshire, and really it's a stunning spot. The clouds roll above you, the sun sets sparkling on the clouds. It's a very beautiful spot and very rugged and wild. You feel in touch with nature, and I guess if you're that way inclined with God. So it was just down here below me where they first had the camp. And it really is a stunning spot. There should have been a castle here. You almost wonder why there wasn't. Normally the Normans would put a castle anywhere that they could defend. Possibly there's just not enough up there. Now we're looking east across the Cheshire Plain towards the Wrekin, which is hidden by those rocks. It's not just the rocks that the folly sits on top of. There's actually a spine running along the hill of very large, hard boulders. And all the way along it, you can walk. There's some points where it gets a little hairy, but it's just such a beautiful spot. The Midlands can be a little bit less dramatic. You have the peak in Derbyshire, you have the flat beauty of the Cheshire Plain, past that Shropshire and Wales. But as you head through Staffordshire and up into Manchester from this end, it's not boring, but it's not striking. And here, this is a very striking spot. Really is beautiful. And I was glad I made it here just in time for sunset. Now, walk a little bit along the hill here. It does get rather slippy and not a very wide path later on. Some people climb over onto the second and third set of rocks, but I think you want mountain climbing equipment to go on the third set. So this spot inspired Methodism, inspired a religious revival, and before that inspired the building of a folly, a castle that should have been. Normally follies are associated with a house to give some grandeur and history that was absent when you built yourself a nice manor house. But this one, I can't really see, and I'm not sure what it was linked to. It just seemed to be the landowner built it because it would have been a nice spot for a castle and it would be striking in their property. Now it's a really key landmark. And people come up here at Christmas, down in the village there. They have or they certainly did a couple of years ago, a Christmas lights festival. So people from nearby towns come out to this small village for a drink and to appreciate Christmas lights. It's been on my to-do list for a while, but I still haven't made it there. I don't make it up to the Midlands very often. And you see here the castle still looks very authentic. There is the spikes that would stop people climbing up and walking along that ridge. But if you look at the wall, the only clue it's a folly from here to me is there's no land for the rest of the building to be on. And we'll walk up the steps. The steps are also a bit of a clue because the steps are oversized. It's perfectly walkable, but no one would build steps to a building that were quite so high. They're a little bit of a stretch on each one. Whereas if you're wanting it to be striking and scenic, that overscale works very well. And here, for decades, this has been barred off to avoid you going inside. But it's a National Trust property. It's free, obviously. There's a car park at the bottom. You can park on the road outside as well. There is a suggestion that it closes, but I think that's nonsense. It's like one of those properties that has the sign that says during reasonable hours. I'd strongly recommend against climbing around here in the dark at night, but it's perfectly safe if there's a little bit of daylight. And you see, the camera didn't really do justice to the sunset on the clouds, but it really was very stunning here. Bourne and Clowes were looking to revive Methodism because they felt like they'd moved away from Wesley. And this is the perfect spot to reconnect with nature and God's beauty, striking out in the open. And it led to a lot of Methodists in that area. And the village itself has always been a little bit pricey compared to surrounding villages because it appeals for the beauty of it. It's very tranquil. It's quite a small village. It's not got that big overflow of modern estates that tend to be grafted onto the side of villages. And it was been quite famous, been painted quite a few times, and been in some short stories. I think the Old Man of Mow, because it's Mow, not Mow. And some famous people have lived here. Ralph Barlow, who plays for Burslem Port Vale in the 1890s. Emmanuel Foster, who was for Stoke City FC and Staffordshire Rangers FC in the 1960s. Jack Simcock, who was an artist, very bleak work. And Alan John Tankard, who's another former footballer. So quite popular with footballers and a little bit more pricey than surrounding villages, but you can see why when you see how beautiful it is. So I'm going to end it there and come back next Saturday for another history, and please do subscribe, it does help a lot.